Butterflies hear sound through their wings. It is thought that low-frequency sound waves, such as the flight pattern of a predator, are amplified through the veins embedded in the papery membranes of their wings. A low-pitched sound can alter a butterfly's behavior in flight. This sense of momentary self-awareness of either being safe or unsafe seems to be reflected in other creatures in the world. I'm Talia Singer, and this is WhateverWorks. Today I'm speaking with Kathleen and her experiences with music therapy. How did you find therapy in the beginning when you were first starting?
I had an idea from a pretty early age that I wanted to do something involved with wellness in music. When I was in high school, I would often go visit my grandmother who had dementia, and I would play for her. And those were really important experiences in just helping me feel connected to her, especially when she no longer was able to communicate verbally with us. So being able to feel like I had that interaction with her and seeing some of the impacts of that. And back then, I didn't actually know that music therapy wasn't a profession. So I went home one day after a visit with her and I Googled if that was even a thing that you could do. Music therapy existed, and I came across the program at Wilfrid Laurier University.
And so when you told people that you were studying to become a music therapist, what was their reaction to that?
It was such a mixed bag. It's so funny. Thinking back, I was pretty set on it long before I ever applied for a Master of Music Therapy program. And I had such mixed reactions from people when I told them I wanted to become a music therapist. Most of the time it was, I don't know what that is. What is that? Some of the time it was perceived as being a music educator. So I was going to become, they thought I was going to become a teacher. Some people had a solid idea of kind of that I wanted to go into music and wellness and therapy. But I think at the time, we're learning more and more, and the public is becoming more and more educated about music therapy. But at the time, it was really heavily associated with dementia care. So I would most often tell people, and they would assume that would mean I would work in a long-term care facility or work in that population. So kind of just advocating for the profession and educating that there are so many different things and streams of music therapy that I could go into. At that time, I didn't know what, but I knew there were lots of options. So there was a lot of different reactions there for sure.
Is there a difference, like art therapy, is there a difference in music therapy between music as therapy and music therapy?
There is a difference. There's a kind of like a gradient, a spectrum within music therapy. There are some music therapists who see the music as therapy. It's very music-centered, and the music is really the active agent of change in sessions. And then there's kind of like this gradient where you can then use music as a tool in therapy. And you can kind of practice along that depending on what your goals are or your client or your orientation might be. I would say that some therapists kind of err more on one side or the other. I'm more of like a music as a tool in therapy personally, but it's definitely a big range.
Is one of the misconceptions about music therapy that you have to be musical or a musician in order to benefit from it?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's a huge part of education and advocacy that I do with clients and just people learning about music therapy in general. Lots of people think that you have to be a trained musician or you have to know how to play some sort of instrument, or even that you would enjoy singing and want to sing for other people when you actually really don't need musical experience at all. And I've had sessions with clients many times where we don't make music at all. Maybe our music component is listening together, and it really depends on the person.
What was your experience as a client sitting on the other side of the table or the other chair, for instance?
I remember the very first time I went to make the appointment, I called and I hung up. And then I called and I got put on hold and I hung up. And then finally the third time I decided this call was going to go through and I was going to make the appointment.
So Kathleen, tell me about this experience that you had with music therapy and guided imagery.
when I was finishing up my first year of my master's, I decided to do an experiential workshop it's the Bonny method of guided imagery and music. To be a Bonny method guided imagery and music facilitator or music therapist, it's quite a lengthy process. So this was the level 1 introductory training.
The Bonny method of guided imagery and music, or GIM, is a music-centered humanistic therapy in which a specially trained therapist selects a program of music roughly 30 to 45 minutes in length. Typically, a repertoire of classical pieces are chosen specifically to evoke an unfolding of imagery in their client's mind. The client, who's lying in a dreamlike state, can dialogue with their therapist about the images, thoughts, and feelings that come to mind in response to the specially timed music. The client in GIM guides the therapist down the path of their thoughts as they unfold, pointing out images along the way.
In my own personal therapy at that time, I was just really struggling to bring in some of the unknown into my therapy sessions. I almost kind of wanted to have it kind of figured out before I brought it to my therapist. And it was really hard for me to just say, here is this thing that I want to work on. I have no idea how, but here it is, and I want to figure this out together. I think I often over-intellectualized things and kind of hid behind that as a defense mechanism as well. So when I was at that point personally and decided to take this workshop, I really wasn't sold on the method in general. I thought it maybe sounded a little bit out there for me, and I just wasn't sure about it at all, but I thought I would give it a try, and a lot of my classmates were doing it as well.
So, Kathleen, walk me through this session with the Bonny method.
During the experiential portion, I took on the role of a client. And in a typical session, usually it starts with just a bit of a conversation of where you're at that day, and then an induction. So it's essentially like a guided imagery relaxation. And that first step is really to help you get into a deep, relaxed state. And then once that happens, there's recorded music programs, and you sit back and you try to just really take in the music and see where it takes you with images and feelings that it brings up. The therapist is meant to support you and kind of be like a guide through that. And when I just let myself be fully in that experience, I was so shocked by the images that were happening, the way I just could be in that moment and not feel like I needed to have control over everything. And the way that I could just tell the person who was acting as a therapist exactly what I was experiencing, what I was feeling, what was going on for me. And then the music, as the experiential session progressed, really started to elicit some vivid images for me that were correlating to a lot of the things that I'd been working on in therapy, but just could not really tap into. I didn't know that at the time. I was kind of looking back on it and processing it afterwards. And I felt like I was almost able to tap into some of those pre-verbal unconscious things that I'd just been guarding myself from before. And then afterwards, we reflected on it, the person who was acting as my therapist, and we did some drawing, and we did some verbal processing as well. And it was just such a shift for me to kind of let the unknown be not as scary, and also not need to have words for everything, not feel like I needed to be able to explain everything. And being able to access some of those things as a result was really impactful for me.
So would it be fair to say that in this session, it was the medium that really kind of like broke through in a revelatory way, and not so much the therapists themselves? Or do you feel that it was like an equal balance between the skill of the therapist and the medium itself?
I think it was the medium itself. I think the therapist contributed, but really at the core of it, I feel like it was the medium itself.
Why do you think it was the Bonny method specifically that worked for you?
It's a good question. I've been reflecting on that a little bit in the last little while, and also was reflecting on it when it happened too. I think potentially for me, I was already using music as a way to kind of tap into some pre-verbal unconscious material. And I was just doing it by myself. I use improvisation a lot as a way to express what I'm feeling that I don't have words for. And then I would usually take what I figured out and then bring that to therapy. And this really, I feel like, combined those pieces together, and was able to do that in the moment with another person and in such a supportive environment too. That element was really important.
Kathleen, I'm wondering if you feel comfortable enough, and it's okay to say no, if comfortable enough to share some of those images and what they meant to you.
Yeah, so there was a lot of nature imagery, and a lot of it was me on this trek through a forest. And every once in a while, I would get into a clearing. The forest felt very dark and foreboding. And then every once in a while in the imaging, I would get to this part of the forest where there was a bright clearing, and it felt like it had an entirely different emotion, like set of feelings. And throughout all of it was about an hour. Throughout all of it, this blue butterfly kept coming back again and again. There were different parts of it that it kind of became clear related to my fear of leaning on other people, and feeling like I needed to go through that dark, foreboding forest alone. And this presence of the butterfly throughout most of it, reminding me that didn't need to be like that. I didn't need to take on all of these things and hold them by myself. There were some other elements that I'll probably choose to keep to myself, but that was a very big revelation for me with everything that had been going on in my life, and how I'd held my cards really close, and even the people close to me didn't really know what was going on in my inner world for a really long time. So to have that experience of seeing this butterfly follow me around and be okay with wherever I went and whatever happened, be with me in the forest and be with me in the clearing, that was very profound for me.
I'm wondering if you can walk me through that session that you've experienced. Like, what was the physical environment like? Where were you sitting up? Were you lying down? Was there music playing? How did the images pop into your mind? Was it elicited through sound, through music, through what the therapist was saying? Like, walk me through the session.
Usually in this method of guided imagery, there's set music that you use, and it uses mostly classical music. There's different almost like playlists that are used for specific purposes. So after the induction, and I was laying down. I was laying down with a blanket and a pillow. The induction, I think we used a visual relaxation exercise. And it was really meant to feel like you were in like a deep, relaxed, almost altered state, which it did. I didn't really consciously think about the fact that I was actually in a classroom at that time because it was a workshop. And I definitely wasn't thinking about the fact that there were other people around. I was just really, really in that moment feeling like it was just me and the person acting as a therapist. And then after the induction, the music started. So I think it was about 45 minutes of music. And the music was meant to have an arc where it started really calming and slow, and then it kind of would build up and then come back down. And it went through some different points where it felt really intense, and there was a really big sense of tension, and then there would be this sense of release that would come, as music can do really, really effectively. So I would say the catalyst for me, I think, I don't know entirely, but the catalyst for the imaging that happened was really the journey that the music took me on when I was in that deeply relaxed state.
I find it so interesting that in order to unlock this part of yourself, as you say, the deep recesses of your unconscious, you had to be surrounded by people. And the realization that came from it, that, you don't have to do things alone, happened when there was people around you. You couldn't have figured that out kind of like in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'd ever really put those pieces totally together overtly, but I was surrounded by people. There was other dyads doing similar things and in different parts of the room.
What does music therapy mean to you?
Music therapy, to me, is the ability to achieve non-musical goals and work on things using music as your medium, music as your method. So you're able to grow and heal using music as that process. And music isn't the end goal. It's that agent of change. So being able to incorporate something that is already therapeutically meaningful for a lot of people can be really powerful in thinking about finding healing in your own life.
Can the music, or I don't know if you've been able to hear that music since then, since the experience that you've had, can it take you back to that time when you were lying on the floor in a classroom, having this kind of like epic moment all to yourself?
I haven't heard the whole program. I haven't listened back to the set of music that we listened to. And I actually haven't had an experience where it kind of brought me back to what I was experiencing, and especially the vivid imagery. I haven't had that. But when I listen to certain classical songs that I think relate to or kind of sound like some of the music that was used in this session, I think about the Blue Butterfly particularly. And that's part of the big part that comes back for me. And I think sometimes, whether I do it consciously or unconsciously, I reach to some of that music to remind myself that I'm not alone. And I don't know if I always overtly put those pieces together, but to remind me of the Blue Butterfly and being surrounded in that like place of safety and being held and contained in that moment. So in that way, it very much can bring me back to those moments.
I love that. That's really great. Do you find yourself ever revisiting that moment or that music or the imagery of the blue butterfly?
I think the thing that I often come back to is that sometimes when we're walking through really difficult times in our life, we don't always have words for what we're going through. And sometimes we get so stuck in overanalyzing what's happening or trying to find all our whys. And just in the way that music can be such an emotion-centered experience, even just sitting back and listening to it, I think for me, that's what makes it that really powerful therapeutic tool to use in sessions. And time again, for both me and for my clients, music has given a voice to material that's really difficult to communicate, while at the same time kind of helping me keep distance or helping clients keep distance from that. So it both acts as a way to express those things, but also as a container to hold those things. And I think that can be very beautiful.
This has been the 4th episode of WhateverWorks. This podcast is written and produced by me and edited by David Conroy and Jason Ball. The theme song for this podcast is called Universal Donor, off the album Hopeful Monster, written and performed by Jason Ball. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Music. This episode contains a special recording of Kathleen's original music titled Blue Butterfly Improvisation.